Let's talk about burnout. And this is I think, in some respects, a bigger problem in social work and human services than it might be elsewhere. I wouldn't be at all surprised if we had a greater population or a greater proportion of our workforce in the human services that are experiencing burnout than occurs in other sectors of American employment, in part because of the conditions you're going to be seeing that are conducive to burnout, in part because of management practices, in part because of the nature of the industry and the level of availability of positions and of alternatives for people. What's that now?
The hostile task environment.
Yeah, a hostile task environment.
And not enough pay.
No, we'll be talking about some of those things. It may also be a case of some of the kind of personality configurations of people that come into this profession, the way we deal with life in some respects, that may also make us a bit more prone for burnout than for others, particularly if we're looking at the relationship between commitment to the job or commitment to the people we serve and its relationship to the reimbursement that we receive for the work that we do, the amount of support that we receive for doing that work, and the level of respect that's accorded to us in the community. The significant imbalances there may in fact make us predisposed to these kind of stressors and also to burnout. Let's look at what it means, though. Burnout, Mason and Ivancevich, these two psychologists, define it essentially this way: a psychological and persistent process brought about by unrelieved work stress, resulting in emotional exhaustion, depersonalization, and feelings of decreased accomplishment. Now, I want to emphasize that we're talking about an adaptation. We're talking about a persistent process that permits somebody to stay on the job despite experiencing these psychological and behavioral symptoms. And in many respects, that's what makes it most disturbing, because people find a way to get up at 6:30 in the morning and make it to their work to experience another dreaded day of this kind of depersonalization and this kind of alienation. As in most of the things we talk about, a variety of different stages or a variety of different models. Here's a stage model. This is a precondition. This is before burnout takes place, but involvement is characterized by engagement, by challenge, by reward, by productivity. This is the worker that we would like to have with us. This is the person we'd like to be at work. Frustration, the sense of the loss of effectiveness, both psychological and objective, the emotional and physical fatigue are characteristic of the early stages of burnout, here called stagnation. Now, for some people, by virtue of their way they respond to these kind of stressors, their problem-solving strategies, by virtue of the opportunities that are available to them, by virtue of the lack of constraint that others may experience, might find another way out of stagnation and return to involvement, either in another position within the organization, in another organization, perhaps in another career, or through some other kind of activity. But for other folks, they move on to this stage of detachment, of psychological withdrawal. And then, in the most damaging way, rejecting opportunities for re-engagement. At this point in time, the adaptation, and an adaptation in favor of burnout, has taken place. So that even opportunities or invitations to re-engage are rejected by the individual, either overtly or covertly. Individual may sabotage opportunities for re-engagement even when those things are unavoidable and presented to one another. If this continues and gets worse, and it doesn't have to, it can continue and stay right at this level. So people can spend 10, 20 or more years burned out, but in position. In the military, with respect to a slightly different phenomenon, we would talk about the Rhodes status, retired on active duty. Right? There are a lot of people out there in the human services that are retired on active duty. Right? And in the human services, many of these people are responsible for providing services to others in need and to vulnerable populations. And yet we're talking about people who are psychologically withdrawn, not engaging, lack of productivity and commitment. If the situation gets worse, it now begins to move to a much more acute kind of depression. So now we're talking about self-doubt, escape, thoughts of escape becoming much more prominent, all the signs or many of the signs of clinical depression. It can even lead to suicide. If people, either at this point or at this point or at this point, re-engage, then we'll be talking about intervention. And this is realistic efforts to escape burnout constructively, and moving ahead with their lives in a healthful way. Now, what are some of the organizational factors that are conducive to burnout? And again, I'd like you just to do an internal silent inventory of your current job, your past job, your placement, and have you experienced these factors in this kind of way? In these places, was there a norm of constantly giving to others? That demand that one gives of oneself? Were hierarchical staff interactions discouraged? That is to say, were interactions with subordinates and interactions with supervisors discouraged? So that you were expected to just kind of stay among yourselves, that kind of caste kind of system. Were there constant demands for perfection? Said differently, was failure, was error regarded in a provocative way? Was it highly condemned? Were you viewed as less than competent if you made a mistake? Expectations of extra effort were constantly there, but with minimal rewards for the extra effort. Were suggestions for improving morale of the workforce largely ignored or unrewarded? Were the work activities repetitive and without variety? Was there minimal additional resources available for extra effort tasks? You have to do more, but we're not going to give you any more resources to do what you're required to do. Was mutual participation discouraged so that people worked alone, made decisions alone, etc.? Isn't this interesting? Evangelistic leadership, which also is the my way or the highway kind of leadership, right? After all, when you're talking with an almighty, you really don't have to be talking to humans. You simply need to be talking at humans, right? Were policy changes unrelated to problem priorities and therefore largely arbitrary? Were policy changes so frequent and too frequent to even be evaluated? So again, arbitrary. Is there rigid role typing for workers? So that this is what you do, this is what we hired you to do that. Does the organization display a culture wherein playfulness is viewed as unprofessional? When you're at work, you're expected to work, not expected to laugh. Right? Go back to your office, there's no time for chit-chat, this kind of stuff. Okay? Is it a culture, is it an organizational environment of pervasive isms, ageism, sexism, nepotism, racism, other kind of isms, throw them in there? Is there an emphasis on past successes as opposed to current and future successes? Is there a constant shifting of ground rules for the policy so that one really doesn't know where one's footing is with regard to how things are valued and what procedures are to be followed within the organization? Is there a little emphasis on positive feedback, particularly in the natural course of the day's activities? Is there chronic work overload? Is there a minimal emphasis on comfort of the environment? Is the environment sterile? Is the environment deficient in terms of honest to goodness hygiene factors? Is it a place that's populated with dead-end jobs for people who are talented and ambitious? Now, notice the qualification there. A dead-end job for somebody who's not planning on going anywhere is itself likely not a source of stress. But for somebody who wants to move onward or upward, either organizationally or personally, professionally, a dead-end job is a dead end. It's something that ultimately you have to escape. Is there excessive paperwork? Poor communication and feedback? And is professional self-care dismissed or denigrated? Did any of you, in doing your mental check work, come up with a number of yeses?
Yes.
Quite a few? Just as a number, what would you have said?
6.
6.
Oh.
6? I think there are about 24 items.
Half.
Half?
14.
14?
And 1 icky.
I find where I work that coworkers take it upon themselves to improve the environment. Like like first thing in the morning, instead of diving straight into work, we just all get together and chit chat.
Yeah.
That's done for a good 45 minutes.
Yeah.
And just knowing that other people are in the same boat is a huge support system.
You're exactly right. You're exactly right.
And it makes a world on the way that your day is going to go.
Well, that's good to hear. Other comments about burnout?
I feel that, like my past organization,
Mm-hmm.
there might have been like 2 things on here. So, like the score is very good for how the organization operated, but I felt very burned out by the population.
By what?
By the population, I've never felt burned out before. I just like, I felt burned out.
We go back to the notion of stress, where different events, different stimuli will be differentially stressful or not for different people. And one of the neat things I think that many times as social workers we're perhaps a little bit better prepared to accept is the uniqueness of the individual and how important that is, so that no one policy, no one program is going to impact equally everybody in a population. No one work environment is going to impact equally the individuals who are part of that workforce. So what might have been for you a very challenging population, and one that in the end was not sufficiently rewarding with respect to the nature of the relationship you had with them, the technology resources you had, the expectation that you or others had for your role with them, might have been for somebody else highly challenging and highly rewarding. No fingers are being pointed here, one better than the other. Difference. What I would like now, for the final kind of exercise we're going to have in this semester, is a volunteer, you. Come on up. Have a seat. You comfortable being taped?
Sure.
Tell the folks, tell the camera who you are.
I'm Christina Jenkins. I am a social worker with hospice and palliative care in Mitchell County, North Carolina. I've been there for an extended period of time, and I am finishing up with the master's program. Hooray.
What's your role at the agency?
Currently, my role within the agency is shifting. And with the shift, there has been a lot of, for lack of a better word, commotion. So a lot of the commotion and a lot of the unsettled rest and a lot of the factors that you discussed tonight have to do with a lot of changes in policy, procedure, personnel. It's all encompassing. Basically, people are doing more work for less pay with far greater expectations, which does not make for a good situation. But unfortunately, when within a bureaucracy, that's what can happen sometimes. So as of June 1, my role as a social worker, which is kind of sad, will shift to a human service organizational manager. Total shift, 360. So it's covered tonight as one of those roles where you shift out of what you're good at and what you feel drawn to into something that you hope you feel just as drawn to and just as passionate.
Are you getting some idea why you're the one who volunteered for this?
Yeah.
Okay, I want, if you would, and again, this is being taped, so it's only within the limits of what your level of comfort happened to be. Will you talk about what it's meant for you to move as you're anticipating moving from the practitioner level to the manager level?
Practitioner level, there was much more, I think, concreteness because I went into work, I knew my job role, my job expectations. There were other social workers, there were other clinicians, there was a care plan team, and it's almost that I'm off of that team, and I'm moved into another role which does not have the cushion of that team around it. I have the support of the staff, yes. I have a quality staff. Let's say I will be serving a quality staff and hopefully serving them well. But there was a major dynamic shift, and even though I haven't transitioned into that role, I can already feel the shift and the change in the way people perceive and view me.
Were you going into some detail about that?
Working with other social workers closely, sharing a very limited office space, and communicating with them about business as well as life in general. You cannot help but to develop some kind of bond with people. Nurses, social workers, clinical staff, because we're in the vehicle, we do home visits, we spend our day together, so you're not going to talk about clinical stuff 24/7 while you're on the job. You're going to share life. And one of the biggest, maybe I don't want to say what could be or could not be, one of the biggest hindrances is these people know a lot about me to a degree. I don't have people in the office that I go out on the weekend with, but I have people in the office who know me. So there are people in the office who are concerned that I may share a closer relationship because I have spent more time with some people on the job, not off the job. So there is concerns that I can see surfacing by just body language and the undercurrent of the office as to how some people will employ their ability to sway me in certain areas and or not.
Have you begun to sense people's relationships with you changing?
Yes, good and bad. People are a little bit more mindful of what they say to me and how they say it already. But I have been more mindful of how I present myself to them in the role transition because of the great amount of unsureness, because in the past year in the organization I'm in, there has been so much. It's just as if you took a snow globe and just took all the parts loose in a snow globe. Well, the snow, turn it up, shoot it up, and then set it back down, and just the parts fall where they may. So there is a lot of apprehension and a lot of unsureness that they verbalize to me. One of the things they feel confident in is the transition in the leadership roles at work. But when you have a new person shifting into that role, it's still very scary. It would be scary for me, you know. As a boss that's been there boss lady's been there for 15 years, and she, I don't know, she just, I don't know, she just, she's just as if you, took a snow globe and just took all the parts loose in a snow globe. Well, the snow, turn it up, shoot it up, and then set it back down, and just the parts fall where they may. So there is a lot of apprehension and a lot of unsureness that they verbalize to me. One of the things they feel confident in is the transition in the leadership roles at work. But when you have a new person shifting into that role, it's still very scary. It would be scary for me, you know, as a boss that's been there for 15 years, and she, has been excellent, but I am not her. And that's something that, that I'm already trying to lay the groundwork for. We are the same, but we are equally very, very different. She was also a social worker who transitioned into the role as manager.
Have you had the experience yet of, let's say, checking, deciding that you wouldn't say something to somebody that you would have had you not been making this transition to a new role?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Because the words that I used, there was no reason for them to ever use words against me. Not saying that they would, but I must be careful in my word selection because you don't really know how it's going to be interpreted and how they filtered it, what they walked away with. So I choose my words more wisely because, I don't want to hear them again circled all the way around to very different meanings. And it can happen very quickly.
What are the feelings that you've experienced? And again, this is just within the level of your comfort in sharing these things. But what are the feelings that you've experienced when you've realized that it's important to check what you were going to say? That no longer say things or to say things to people that you would have been quite comfortable in doing in the past?
It's twofold. It has good. I try to look at it twofold, good and bad. It makes me more mindful to write on my tongue sometimes that maybe I was talking a little bit too much before about things that I didn't need to be discussing. But it just makes me, not in a negative way, because I think it's just good practice to monitor your words wisely, because once you put it out there, you can't take it back. So if anything, in all facets of my life, it's made me monitor my words more closely, as well as my communication skills. Always being mindful that what I'm communicating is not necessarily what that person is hearing. And that's been something I've had to evaluate not only in my professional life, but also in my personal life. So everyone in here knows who's married. Graduate school can be stressful in marriage. So a disclaimer there. So I found it to be a practice of a stressful point that I had to avoid all the way around.
Have you felt the need to be more politically astute or politically intentional?
Yes, and there was a dynamic that came into play that was unexpected as I transitioned into this role. The future of our agency was very, very, there was a lot of unsureness. So we employed a consulting group who is consulting with us, and this is a very strong-handed consulting group, consultant group. And I am having to, I found myself being a middleman. You are the leader per se in this role, but also you are a middleman because now I have people, not only the board, but I have this consulting group over top of me. And it's very politically driven because they consult with us, but they are also very aware of policy and procedure and how to pull money from resources other than the typical resources that we would use. So yes, and politics does come into play.
How is it that you find yourself making this transition? Which is to say, is this a position that you sought? Was it a position where the agency came to you? How did this occur?
This venture started probably 3 or 4 years ago, and it was there was some issues that happened that warranted the current CEO to do some strategic planning. And she was wise enough to start that early out to avoid a lot of unsureness, and also to acclimate me into that role to a degree, to be as prepared as possible. But we were totally blindsided by the vast amount of changes that would occur within the shift of leadership in our agency. So this was a role, not necessarily, I always have a plan A, B, or C, as you already discussed, and this was one of those.
Was this plan A?
This, yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. And just because Plan A is Plan A, it doesn't mean that Plan B looked better. But you can always shift Plan B up to Plan A in time. Does that make sense?
Well, we'll find out.
Yeah.
What this transition meant for your family?
I don't really know yet because I haven't really, what is expected of me is that you will put in basically by the consulting group, you will put in a 50-hour week, 50 to 55-hour week, and you will only get 40 hours paid. Because when you are in a senior leadership role, that is what expected and everyone does it. So I have really had to set my parameters for myself as well as the staff and be a quality advocate for them, because this consulting group is coming from the business model rather than the human services model. So it is a battle, and it will continue to be a battle. So finding a equilibrium as I transition into this is going to be difficult. It's almost as if getting graduate school done, getting that stress off, I will immediately shift into this position. So I will free my mind from this, and I will let all that go with that.
Okay. Now, without getting too specific, what kind of negotiations or accommodations has your family had to make, or have you had to talk with family members about, so that this is something that you'll be able to do successfully?
As you talked about tonight, you carry with you emotionally and psychologically your family, and I try to put them always as a consideration in the life choices that I make. So considering this transition this endeavor was mentioned, it wasn't sudden. I was able to talk with my husband in detail to see his feelings about it. My husband is a very black and white kind of guy. I'm a whole lot of gray in between. So, I debate, and he is very decided in his answer. So he basically told me that it was a personal decision that I must make within myself to know if I wanted to pursue that path or not. And to me, I wanted to be a role model, of course, to my children, to get through school and to transition into this. But I did not want it to be at the sacrifice of my family at all.
When you look at the future, do you see it as a world of certainty, a world of uncertainty? Where is, I'm going to guess you're going to tell me it's some kind of shade of gray.
I am, if you look at 100% of transitioning into my job, I am 60% concrete sure of a lot of things that will unfold, and decisions and policies and procedures. There's a 40% in there that is up in the air, simply because of you think you want something, then you get into it, it may not be your cup of tea. So that's the unsureness. And then you look at the world of healthcare and the human service organization. I think with healthcare it's going to be a fight, scratch and claw continually. So that's going to be a battle. So there's a lot of unforeseeable uncertainty that I know is there, and I'll just have to continue to deal with.
Okay. In terms of the biggest uncertainties that are really significant, all right? And I want you to think of this in terms of the challenges that you face in order to be successful in your agency, in your new role. Will you prioritize from the most significant uncertainties to the least the following three factors? The external environment, the agency, your board, the people whom you are directly responsible to, and your staff.
Yes, in order of concern, of course, the foremost is the uncertainty of that agency. That's the most, that's where my biggest source of apprehension and concern comes. The board is not super concerning, even though they do have impact. And I know the present staff that I have, and they have weathered a great storm, so I feel very confident with them. and want to employ them further and encourage them further to stick with them. So it's just the uncertainty of the organization within itself.
Within itself.
Mhm.
Now, how does that relate to the board, the environment, and the staff?
It's a cycle, it's all impactful, one upon the other. Because without the funding and the money and the necessitated needs that would drive people to pay staff and for there to even be a board formulated to operate, to help assist in operating this agency. If that makes sense.
Make sense to you?
Yeah, it makes sense
Cool.
to me.
All right. Think about your relationship with your boss, your executive director. And then when you transition into the new role, your boss, in effect, will be your members of your board. Have you had enough experience yet as the let's say presumptive executive director to get a sense of how the relationship you had with the person immediately above you in the past will be similar to or different than the kind of relationship that you'll have with the members of your board in your new role?
He's a liaison role between the board, and I did have enough interaction with this board ongoingly to witness the dynamics of the present board and then witness dynamics of how a board would function overall in this particular culture that we're working in, in this organization with. So there is also a lot of cultural factors that impact this agency as well. So to be a liaison with the board and an information source, a quality information, because I report to them upon much of the agency. So I need to be a quality reporter to them in order to shed true light or quality light on the staff and their operations and their work performance. I need to be a mouthpiece for other people is very scary, so I want to be a quality mouthpiece.
Okay. Now let me ask the members of class, how many of you aspire at some point in time in your career to be a manager or administrator of an agency? Okay, all right. For those of you who just raised your hand, and as you're thinking about the challenges that you face or the uncertainties that you face, or I'll just say the fears that you might face in making that transition, would you be comfortable in asking Christina if she's experienced anything along the lines of what your particular issue might be? So we got Anna, if you don't mind. What, we'll prompt it, right? As you're thinking about making this transition at some point in time, what do you think might be one of the bigger challenges that you'll face?
Confidence in myself.
Okay, all right. So how about if we ask Christina about that experience? What might be how might you phrase that question to her?
Have you had to experience doubting, your skills? You're talking about moving from one position to another one you're comfortable with to one that's new. How have you worked through that?
Thought a lot about human behavior because in having a quality executive director for this, I went into work, I got out of the car, and I always knew that the bigger picture was taken care of by this lady sitting up there in the front office. And I blindly put my faith in her because I trusted her wholeheartedly. And I dealt with the client, the day-to-day activities, of just the home visits, and that's where I wanted to be, and that's what I was doing. I kind of took it for granted until, some time back. I thought, I want the staff to drive up in their car and shut the door and do their patient care, quality end of life support, and not have to worry and headache with, is the lady in the front, sitting in that front office taking care of things from a policy, political, procedure, is she addressing all of that in order for me to do my job effectively and for me to have a paycheck? So the biggest, self-doubt, lots. Sometimes you are your own worst enemy, doing battle with yourself. but I've learned very quickly that the way I react, particularly when this consulting group comes in, the way I react to their information, if I look worryful or fearful, automatically it's like a ripple effect that goes around the whole office. That if she is concerned, I need to be concerned, and it just vacillates all the way around. So I'm trying to do reassurance. If there's something you need to be concerned about or warranted attention to, I will be the first to gather you all up and say, this is a concern, but this is my concern rather than your concern. If it's a group concern, we'll make it a group concern and we'll address it as a group. But self-doubt, yeah, continually, constantly, I worry. I go to bed every night and worry, can I make this transition? Can I do this? Am I going to be effectual? Am I going to fail? There is a lot of self-doubt until I'm, and the only thing that kind of diminishes that is when working with staff, they look at me and say, you can do this and I want you to do this. So that's the only thing, and it's not that I've tried to boast myself up. If anything, sometimes I try to shrink away from it, and it's just not happened. So I figured then I need to transition because I've tried to shrink away from it. And it's just, I can't. Self-doubt, it's there. Don't be your own worst enemy.
Other questions?
And I won't make a whole lot more money. That's usually the big thing. Very, my butt would have been sitting in that office somewhere in a chair. Not a lot more money, and it wasn't about the money. It was simply to do the best that I could in a job that I feel very passionate about.
But it helps.
But it helped. Money always helps. And that's something my husband and I've done great battle over. Is he is a money man. He is a business model, and he's like, that's not enough money for the amount of work and stress you're going to be getting for that. And he's just highly fatigued about that. But that's just the way we roll.
Now,
How have you been able to get a piece about the difference between what you do on a daily basis now and what you'll be doing then? Because I've wondered, if I'm, all jacked up about therapy and then one day I'm doing mostly administrative stuff, will I feel an emptiness because it's so different? Or do you
I
are you really
understand
interested in
what
it?
you're saying. I completely understand what you're saying. I have done home visit care in a home health setting, and then work cooperatively on the side to get a paycheck with a lot of other human service organizations in the area that I'm in. I think if I didn't have that, if I was coming out of this program, or if I went from the BSW to MSW and administrating to the administrative role, I don't feel confident. I know that I could not do that. But being acclimated and done social work for this period of time, I feel that to a degree I have done that facet of my career, my role in life. Now it's time to transition into this, and we'll see what happens.
It's like a chapter thing.
It's almost like a chapter. And the issue of burnout, you need to transition sometimes because when you feel, I was happy to go on 2 maternity leaves for 3 months. I saved my time. In that period of time, if there hadn't been some distance from the job, I would have been completely burnt out. And I do feel like it was getting to a point that I needed that transition into something, not away. I still wanted to be, involved, but I needed something more, probably within the agency, not something different, not something more, something different within the agency. But my biggest concern is I have a problem sitting behind a desk because I am used to doing home visits and being out in the field. And that is one of my biggest concerns, is how I'm going to manage an 8 to 5:30 in the evening day in an office. Sure, I need any excuse in the whole wide world to go somewhere to a meeting anywhere outside of that office.
other questions?
How do you deal with community doubt, if that makes sense?
I've not had to experience a lot of community doubt because that's been something that I've not encountered, thank goodness, out of all the turmoil that has happened within the agency. I'm very glad there was not community doubt compounding on top of the vast amount of stressors that we have been dealing with. The agency that I'm employed with has a quality reputation within the community, but you can't always rest on your laurels because you have to keep working forward and progressing forward and making headway. So I've not had to deal with a lot of community doubt as far as the agency goes, because that's something we've not had to face. I have not had to deal with a lot of community doubt professionally or personally as I transition into. I have not encountered that thus of yet, but I'm sure that I will at some point in time. That is something that I have not. I live in a very small county where everyone knows everyone. I've been in many homes all over the county. A lot of hospice patients and families are familiar with my face, and thus far we have not marked or sold I have not personally marred or sold the reputation in the community and this agency. So that's been, thank God, that's been one less thing we've had to deal with among all the changes that we went through. We were at the point, and to give a little history, our census dropped, and our hospice census dropped dramatically. We also lost 5 primary care physicians in our area. We are in a county that the census, the aging census, of course, is going up, but the amount of new census coming in, the amount of children being born into our county is the amount of resources is. So our census dropped. We were overemployed. We don't have a huge amount of staff, but we were overemployed, and this went on for a year at a time. So we exhausted what we had in the bank to write people a paycheck. So we had to call on this consulting group to come and consult to see how we could not get into this shape again, how we could do better and not get into this shape again. Now we're booming. It's more work than what we are equipped with the staff we previously had. But amongst this, we went through an ADR review, meaning half of our patient charges were pulled, and Medicare was holding money on us for an extended period of time when we had just come from being completely in a redlining all the way. So all these people, and they weren't getting a paycheck, and they were still working with hopes. And that's a very devoted staff who comes in and who are working, and they don't know if they're going to get a paycheck. But a lot of people were rooted there. So it's been. I don't even have a word for what the agency has dealt with in the past year. That's one thing we have not had to deal with. So I said all that to say that. Thank you.
Any other questions? You can tell how well this is all planned. Hope it was instructive. Appreciate your honesty.
Thank you all. Very much. I wish you all the greatest of success.